Hilchos Shevuos Perek Revi, the Laws of Oaths, Chapter 4. We learned in Chapter 1 that there are 4 types of oaths. The first one is called the Shevuos Bitui, the oath of expression. It basically means a standard oath where a person swears to the truth of something that happened in the past or a commitment to be made in the future. Today and tomorrow we're going to explore the laws relating to Shevuos Bitui at length. Many different scenarios that apply within the creation of a Shevuos Bitui, as we will see throughout today and tomorrow's chapter. It says the Rambam halacha aleph misha nishba shelo yochal hayom klum. If somebody swears that he's not going to eat anything today, v'achal pachis mikazayis, and then he eats that day, but he only eats less than an olive-sized portion. In halacha, in order to be considered eating, an olive size needs to be consumed. So since he only consumed less than an olive size, pater, he's exempt, he hasn't transgressed his oath, we're not going to hold him liable. She'ein achila pchusa mikazayis. Eating, according to halacha, is no less than an olive-sized portion. This is equivalent to somebody who would eat half of the required amount from a non-kosher animal that was slaughtered improperly, or animal that had a mortal wound, where it's forbidden biblically to eat it, but we can't hold you accountable to it. But if the person said, he pointed to a specific object, even if it was the tiniest object, and he said, I swear, I'm not going to eat this entity, and he ate it, chayav, he's liable. Even if the entity which he swore about was a tiny mustard seed, or even smaller, since he labeled the object, that's what we're going to hold him to. Halacha beis, nishba shelo yit'oim klum, if the expression the person used when he swore was, not I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to taste anything, then even if he eats the smallest amount, he's also liable, because tasting implies even the smallest taste. Halacha gimel, misha nishba shelo yochal hayom. A person swears he's not going to eat today. The words he used was eating. V'shasa, and he drinks. Chayav, he's liable. Shahashasiya bichlal achila. In the Torah, drinking is included under the umbrella of eating. The word achila refers to both eating and drinking. Lefichach, therefore, im achal v'shasa, were a person to swear that he's not going to eat on a certain day, and then he eats and drinks, ein chayav alamalkos achas, im hayamezid, is only liable to one set of lashes if he was purposeful. If he acted purposely, oichatas achas im hayashegig, or one sin offering if he acted inadvertently. Halacha dalid nishba shelo yishte hayom. If a person in his oath singled out drinking, he swore, I'm not going to drink today. Harei mutar lechol. He's permitted to eat. She'ein achila bichlal shasiya. Because while drinking is under the umbrella of eating, eating is not under the umbrella of drinking. Drinking refers exclusively to drinking. The kama yishte v'yehei chayav. How much does a person have to drink to be considered to have transgressed his oath and be liable? When it came to eating, it was an olive size. When it comes to drinking, how much is it? Nira li, says the Rambam, it seems to me, although it's not explicit in the Talmudic sources with regard to this halacha, she'ein chayav ad sheyishte revi'is kisharo yisurin. The Rambam says, it seems to me we can make a comparison to any other prohibition in the Torah where you transgress for liquids at the volume of a revi'is, which is about 3 ounces, like any other prohibition in the Torah. Halacha hey, shvuah shelo eichal hayom. A person says, I'm not going to eat today, I swear I'm not going to eat today, v'achal minin harbe. And then he eats not just one thing, he eats a whole menu, many different types of foods. A person makes an oath, I'm not going to drink today, and he drinks many types of drinks, different juices and sodas and waters. He's only liable one time, because the transgression was the eating or the drinking. We don't look at the specifics. Even if the person says specific items in his oath, I swear I'm not going to eat today meat, bread, and legumes, and he ate all 3 types, he's only liable once, because he used the word shvuah, the word oath, only once. And they all combine together to create the requisite olive-sized portion to make him consider transgressing his oath. A person says, I take an oath that I'm not going to eat and I'm not going to drink. Here, he specifically labeled the drinking, even though he could have just said eating, and drinking would equally be part of the umbrella of achila. So since over here he used the word eating and drinking, v'achal v'shasa chayav shtayim. If he both eats and drinks, he's liable twice. Shashasiya bichlal achila, because drinking by default is included in eating. Since he was specific and he said, I'm also not going to drink, he has revealed his intent that for him, drinking is not included in eating. It's like somebody who would swear on one item on its own, and on a second item on its own, and therefore he's liable twice. Halacha Zayin v'chein. Similarly, ha'omer, one who says, Shevuos shelo eichal pas chitin upas so'edin upas kusmin. I make an oath that I'm not going to eat wheat bread, barley bread, or spelt bread. V'achlan, and he ate them all. Chayav al kolachas v'achas, he's liable for lashes on each one separately. Shaloi amar pas upas, ela lechalek ulechayav al kolachas. The only reason he used the word bread, again, wheat bread, barley bread, spelt bread, is because his intent is to divide the transgressions and to hold him liable for each one that he will transgress. Unlike in the previous halacha, where a person says bread, meat, and legumes. Even though he labeled 3 different items, because he didn't do anything specific to differentiate them, over there we only hold him liable once. Here he said pas each time, we hold him liable for each time. Halacha ches, haya chaveirei mesariv beilechel etzlai. His friend was nudging him, really bothering him, to come eat by him for dinner. V'amar lei, and he kept on saying, Bo yushasei imi yayin v'chalav v'dvash, come over, come drink with me, wine, milk, and honey. V'amar, and the guy, in upset, he said, Shvuah she'eni sheisa yayin v'chalav v'dvash. You know what, I make an oath, I'm not going to drink wine, milk, or honey. V'shasa mehen, and then he goes ahead and drinks from these substances. Chayav al kolachas v'achas bifnei atzmai, he's liable for each one on its own. Shahaya le'leimar, he could have easily just gotten out of it by saying, Shvuah she'eni sheisa klum. You know what, I make an oath, I'm not going to drink anything. Oy masha amarta, or I'm not going to drink that which you said. Umisha chazaru peirat, because he went back and was specific on each detail. Gila daitoi shechiyev atzmei b'shvuah kol min v'min bifnei atzmai. He has revealed his intent to hold himself liable by an oath for every individual species. Lefichach, therefore, ein mittarfin zeim zeh, the wine, the milk, and the honey don't combine with each other. Ve'einei chayav ad sheyechal keshir mimin echad. He won't be held liable till he drinks the requisite substance, or revius, 3 ounces, from every individual species. Hayil ve'hin chalukin lechatois, since they would be different with regard to the obligation for a sin offering, he would need to eat the different species to hold him liable. They're like 2 separate prohibitions of like forbidden foods. You have forbidden fats and forbidden bloods. We said in the laws of forbidden food that they don't combine. You can't drink a combined revius to hold you liable. You need to have each one separately. As was explained in the laws of forbidden foods in chapter 4. Halacha tes shvuah shelo eichal kikar zu. A person, here's where the nuance in the Hebrew grammar is going to make a big difference. Shevuos shelo eichal kikar zu. A person says, I take an oath that I'm not going to eat this loaf. Oy shelo eichal oisa, or I'm not going to eat it. Kevan sha'achal mimena kazayis chayav. Even though technically the words you used is I'm not going to eat the whole loaf, you don't have to eat the whole loaf to be liable. The moment you consume an olive-sized portion from the loaf, you're already liable. Shevuah shelo eichlena. But if you use an unusual Hebrew word, which has the implication of completeness, I swear I'm not going to eat it up. I'm not going to eat the entire loaf. Then indeed you're not going to be held liable until you consume the entire loaf. Amar, if a person says, Shvuah shelo eichal kikar zu, Shvuah shelo eichlena, he uses 2 expressions. I swear I'm not going to eat this loaf. I swear I'm not going to eat it up. Va'achala, and he ate it. Einei chayav ela achas. He's liable only once, because this is a classic case of a prohibition taking effect on another prohibition. The moment you said, I'm not going to eat the loaf, you've already held yourself liable by eating even an olive-sized portion. So then, when you make the second oath, that I'm not going to eat it all up, it can't take effect. Even an olive size is already forbidden. Therefore, when you do eat an olive-sized portion, or even if you eat the whole loaf, you're only held liable once. Halacha yud v'cheinim amar shvuah shelo eichal hayom. A person says, I'm taking an oath, I'm not going to eat today. And then he specifies the loaf, and he says, I'm not going to eat this loaf. And he ate the whole loaf that day. He's only liable once, because he's already bound by the first oath not to eat anything today. The specific oath on the loaf cannot take effect over and above the prohibition in general on this day. Any similar scenario where you're adding an oath with no real added substance to the first oath, only the first oath takes effect, and you're only held liable for the first oath. She'ein shvuah chalal shvuah, because one oath cannot take effect over and above a second oath. But what if the second oath is more encompassing? Avalim nishba ala kikar shelo yechlena. But if you first made an oath on the loaf, that you're not going to eat the loaf, v'chazar v'nishba shelo yechal klum, and then you made a second oath, you know what, I'm not going to eat anything, oy shelo yechal kikar zu. Or you use the expression, I'm not going to eat this loaf, in the sense that even an olive-sized portion is forbidden. So the first oath was on the whole loaf, And the second oath was on only an olive size. So here you've added, with the second oath, you've added a prohibition. In both of these scenarios, if you eat the whole loaf, you're liable twice. The moment you had made the first oath that you're not going to eat it up, you're only liable if you eat the whole thing. Then when you made the second oath, which says, I'm not going to eat anything, even a smaller portion, or you're not going to eat the loaf in the context of olive size, on account of the second oath, the moment you consume an olive size portion, you're already liable. Only later, when you finish eating the whole loaf, do you get the second liability from the first oath. Since the second oath was more encompassing and caused the prohibition to come earlier, it does take effect, and you're liable twice if you eat the whole loaf. Halacha Yud Aleph, Shevuos shelo yochal te'enim. A person says, I make an oath, I'm not going to eat figs. V'chazar v'nishbal ha'te'enim v'alo anovim. And then he says, I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. Chayav ala te'enim shtayim. So if he then goes ahead and eats figs, he's going to be liable twice for the figs. Sha'arei kol al ha'te'enim shenesru b'shvuah rishayna im ha'anovim shahayu mutarim. Because in the second oath, he included the figs, which were already under the first oath, with a new material that wasn't under the first oath, i.e. the grapes. Since the second oath takes effect on the grapes, it also takes effect on the figs. And he's therefore liable twice for two oaths, as we explained in the laws of forbidden foods, that when the Rambam over there was referring to the general idea of prohibitions, ein isur chalal isur, that if a second prohibition is more encompassing, it can also encapsulate the original first prohibition. So here too, the second oath is more encompassing, so it also falls back on the item which was included in the first oath. Halacha Yud Beis. Shevuos shelo yochal shmeina. A person makes an oath, say he's looking at a cluster of grapes, and he says, I swear I'm not going to eat 8 grapes. Shevuos shelo yochal teisha. Then he says, I swear I'm not going to eat 9 grapes. Shevuos shelo yochal eser. I swear I'm not going to eat 10 grapes. Bein sha'achal shmeina, bein sha'achal teisha, bein sha'achal eser. In this scenario, whether he eats 8 grapes or 9 grapes or 10 grapes, ein echayav ela achas, he's only liable to 1 count of lashes. Now, seemingly, this should be a case of isur kailel. It's more encompassing. With each additional oath, he encompassed more materials. Say the commentaries, nevertheless, in this case, since you can only eat 9 grapes, since you can only reach the goal of your second oath by transgressing the first oath, you can only get to 9. By eating 8, so this is not a case of a more encompassing prohibition. It's not a new item. It's not new material. The second oath fully relies on the first material as well. And therefore, you're only liable once. If the person goes in the opposite way, Shevuos shelo yochal eser, Shevuos shelo yochal teisha, Shevuos shelo yochal shmeina. I swear I'm not going to eat 10 grapes. I swear I'm not going to eat 9 grapes. I swear I'm not going to eat 8 grapes. So here, im achal eser, if he eats all 10 grapes, chayav shalish. He's going to be liable 3 times. I'll call shvuah achas, once for each oath. Because to get to 8, the third oath, you didn't need any of the previous oaths. So by the time you eat 8, you've already transgressed the third oath. You add another grape to 9, you go back and transgress the second oath. You eat 10, you go back and transgress the third oath. If you only ate 9, you're liable twice. If you ate 8, you're liable once. Because the later, although it seems like it's less encompassing, in this case, the later oaths make the prohibition more limited. And like in the case of the loaf, if you first make an oath, I'm not going to eat the whole loaf, and then you add, I'm not going to eat even an olive-sized portion, that second oath does take effect because it applies to a smaller amount, and therefore if you eat the whole loaf, you're liable twice. Same thing over here, you're liable 3 times for the different scenarios of the grapes. Halacha Yudalid, Shevuos shelo yochal te'enim. A person makes an oath he's not going to eat figs. V'chazar v'nishba shelo yochal te'enim va'anovim ke'achas. Then he makes a second oath that he's not going to eat figs and grapes together. So unlike in Halacha 11, where he said just he added the material of grapes, here he adds it in a way that it's intertwined. I'm not going to eat figs is oath number 1. Oath number 2, I'm not going to eat figs and grapes together. V'shagag v'achal te'enim. Then inadvertently he forgets his first oath and he eats figs, which is a transgression. Then he wakes up, he realizes, I transgressed the fig oath, the hifrish karban, and he puts away a sacrifice ready to bring to the temple when he next goes to Jerusalem to bring his sin offering. Then he forgets his second oath and he eats grapes. The question is, does the grapes and the original figs combine to have him be liable for the second oath? And the Rambam says, no, he's not liable for the second round of eating of the grapes. Because in light of the second oath, which says, I'm not going to eat grapes and figs together, eating grapes itself doesn't constitute a transgression. It's like eating a half of a required substance. You don't bring a sacrifice for just eating half of the required substance. Same thing in this scenario of the 10-9-8. He makes an oath, he's not going to eat 10. And then he goes and makes an oath that he's not going to eat 10 and 9. 10 and 9 essentially means 19, says the Rambam. And therefore, if he were to eat 10 and then separate the sacrifice, remembering his first oath, then he goes again, forgets the second oath, and eats only 9 grapes. That's like consuming half of a required substance. You don't bring a sacrifice for that. Or as some texts have it, cha esre. The concept of the second oath was that he's not going to eat 19 in total. After you remember the transgression of your first oath, you only ate 9, not the full 19 together in one state of unawareness. And therefore, you're not held liable for the second round. Halacha tazayin, a man is standing next to 2 loaves. One is big, one is small. And he says, Shevuos shaloi oichal kikar zu agdoila, im oichal kikar zu aktana. I swear I'm not going to eat the larger loaf if I eat the smaller loaf. Then he forgets the condition and he eats the smaller loaf. In this moment, even though he's unaware, his original oath has gone into effect. By consuming the small loaf, he now places himself under a prohibition to eat the larger loaf. Even though the prohibition came into effect in a state of unawareness, if afterwards he consumes the large loaf in a purposeful state, he knows what he's doing, chayav is liable. Because while the prohibition went into effect unawareness, in a state of unawareness, he transgressed it with awareness. Some authorities argue on the Rambam, but the Rambam holds you liable in this case. Halacha yudzayin ochal saktana v'hu zeicher hatnai v'yodea shebachilas hate'aser agdoila. What about the flip side? He consumes the smaller loaf with intent. He remembers the condition. He knows that through eating the small loaf, he's going to forbid the large loaf. Then he forgets and he eats the large loaf thinking that it's not forbidden. Potter, here he's exempt. Because the act of transgression was done in a state of unawareness. If he ate them both inadvertently, Potter, of course he's exempt. If he ate them both purposefully, so obviously if you first ate the small loaf, then you ate the large loaf, you're for sure liable, because you went in order. But the novelty here is, whether you ate the large loaf first or second, chayav, you're liable. You ate the large loaf first. When you ate the large loaf, it wasn't forbidden, because you hadn't yet eaten the smaller loaf. But then later you eat the small loaf, retroactively forbidding the large loaf to have been consumed. It turns out that looking back, you consumed a forbidden loaf. You're liable, since you ate them both with intent. A person depended the 2 loaves on each other by making an oath in the following way. And he said, I swear I won't eat one of them if I eat the other. So you didn't just depend the large loaf on the small loaf. You went both ways. I swear I'm not going to eat one if I eat the other. If you forget the condition and you eat one, which thereby forbids the other. If you eat the second one with intent, you're liable, even though the prohibition went into effect inadvertently, but it was transgressed willfully. If you ate the first one purposefully and the second one inadvertently, you're exempt. Because while the prohibition went into effect willfully, it was transgressed inadvertently. If you eat them both in a state of intent, you're liable, whichever one you eat first. A person makes an oath, he's going to eat this loaf today, the day passes and he doesn't eat. If he does this inadvertently, he has transgressed his oath. He must bring a fluctuating sacrifice. Sin offering, it depends on your means. But if he did so purposely, we can't give him lashes. Even though he transgressed, he made a false oath, but he didn't do a deed. Now, if it's all about doing a deed, why does a person get lashes if he swore in the past that he ate and he really didn't eat? Or he swore that he didn't eat and really he did eat, even though in this moment he didn't do a deed? When you make an oath in the past, if it's false, The moment you uttered the oath, you uttered it falsely. And that's what we're holding you accountable for. But in the case at hand, where he swore that he's going to do something, and he ended up not doing it, that's not a false oath in the moment of the utterance. When you made the oath, you were planning to be a big tzaddik and do the oath. Only later you didn't do it. Later, when you transgressed, you didn't do an act. Halacha chav beis, Misha amar lachaveira, a person tells his friend, one of these scenarios, Shvua loy oichalach, by oath, I will not eat by you. Oy shvua she'eni oichalach. This is more nuanced than the Hebrew, but I translated it the best I could in English. By oath, I won't be eating by you. Or he was nudging him to eat by him. He was trying to hold back. So he swore and said, Shvua she'oichalach. I'll be under oath if I eat by you. Or somebody says, Loy shvua, loy oichalach. I won't be under oath if I don't eat by you, which means if I do eat by you, I'll be under oath. Kol elu asurin. All these forms of expression imply a prohibition. So the bottom line is, he swore that he's not going to eat by him. What if he said all four of these expressions, and then transgressed and ate? He's only liable once. Because this is a classic example of an oath not taking effect over another oath. The moment he says the first one, he's already forbidden. It's not meant to be interpreted as a retraction of any way, even though they could be if you look at the Hebrew closely. The Rambam holds no. Each of the four expressions are just trying to add additional oaths, which have no real halachic significance, and therefore if you transgressed, even after saying all four expressions, you're only held liable only once.